Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. B's Handball Court. Now last week in week 3 we worked on handball skills, so if you've not seen that video, go back to week 3 handball skills and make sure you watch that video. That's where we practice our skills to play this game. Now today we're going to actually play handball in our modified court here. So the first thing we need is to make sure we have a court, just like we talked about last week. You're going to need a wall. Okay, but then we're also going to need to make the court today. Now to make the court, I used cones here. There's purple cones on this side and purple cones on that side to make our court area. Now you don't have to have cones. If you don't, you can use something like socks to line it up like we've done in some of our other games. If you have sidewalk chalk, that would be awesome. You can get sidewalk chalk at the dollar store for $1 for a good sized box. They also sell it at Walmart. It's usually a little bit more expensive there though. So again, the Dollar Tree is probably your best place to get that. All right, now once you have your court set up, and you can make it as big as you would like, think about the size of a handball court at school. You're probably not going to have that much room. We don't. So ours is a little bit smaller, but use as much room as you can, and make sure to look out for windows and things like that to make sure that you're not going to break anything. And again, involve your parents like we talked about last week on where you can do this activity safely. Now, usually in a handball court, you would have a back line. Now, we're going to be using the wall kind of as our back line, and we're going to modify our game a little bit based on the back wall, but we'll talk about that as we get into the rules. Now, handball is one of the most common games that we play at school. Unfortunately, it is also one of the games that is most often played incorrectly at school. Why? Well, it's the nature of the game. If you think about handball in its simplest terms, what is the point of the game? The point of the game is to get the other person out. And so sometimes at a young age, and even later, for some of us, we don't want to get out. So we start modifying rules or changing the rules so that we didn't lose or that we don't lose that game. But then we're not really playing the game anymore. So it's really important that we understand the rules and we play by them. So play fairly today. I'll go over the rules right now. And when you go back to school, please make sure you're playing by the rules and not breaking them or making up rules like many of our students do. All right, everybody, here we go with the rules. The first rule in handball is before you serve it, you must let the ball bounce once and exactly once. It cannot bounce more than once, but it needs to bounce at least once. Once it bounces, you strike the ball. It needs to hit the ground and then hit the wall. That is a legal hit in handball. Every time you strike it, it must hit the ground first before striking the wall, and it may only strike the ground one time. So one time, bounces against the wall, and then the next rule is it must land in the boundaries of the court on the first bounce, and this is a rule often misunderstood. So let's pretend I let the ball bounce, I struck it, hits the ground, hits the wall, and then it bounces here, just inside the line or just inside our cones, and the second bounce goes off the court. Is this in or out? Some of you are thinking right now, well, it's out. It landed out. No, the first bounce is the only one that matters. So if the first bounce is in the court, it is a legal hit. And that means the player trying to return this ball must run off the court to strike the ball and get it back towards the wall. But it is still in play because only the first bounce matters. And this is really important in sports like tennis, for example, would be a very similar rule. The first bounce is the only one that matters. Very important to remember. Okay, then after that, each player has exactly just that one bounce to strike the ball. After they strike it, it must again hit the ground, hit the wall, and land in the boundaries of the court. That's it, boys and girls. Those are the rules for handball. Now, almost anything else you can think of is a made-up rule. So let me show you some of those rules right now. Now, we already went over one that's commonly misunderstood, the placement of the ball. First bounce, where it lands is all that matters. Here's another one that often happens in handball. The ball is struck, comes towards the player, and they do this popcorn, and then they hit it. You're only allowed to touch the ball once per turn in handball. So in that example, I touched it twice, which means I would be out. You cannot touch it twice. You can only touch it once. So you have to position your body like we talked about last week. Very important to be able to move quickly around the court. You must get your body in position to strike the ball on one bounce. Now, you're also not allowed, and this happens on the serve sometimes, to throw the ball or catch the ball or stop it in any way. the ball must be in continuous movement during handball. So again, very simple rules. You strike it, hits the ground, hits the wall, lands in bounds. That's it. And you have the one bounce to return it. All the other rules are made up. Here's another one that I see a lot. Students complain about this one. The ball comes and it's struck. People go, oh, that was a baby. It's not fair. Remember, the point of the game is to get the other player out. So good shot makers will make a low ball or a high ball or a ball that goes far away towards the outside edges of the court because it's harder to return. That's the point of the game. That person's not cheating because they did a baby. They just made a great shot. You have to get there. If it hits the ground, hits the wall, and comes back into the court of play, it is a legal hit, and your obligation as the opposing player is to return it. Okay? So that's it. We're ready to go. I'm going to bring Mrs. B out. She'll be playing against me today, so you will need an opponent on this one. And hopefully, if you have more than one opponent that you can play against at home, like your mom and your dad and your brother or your sister, everybody can play, and you can just take turns like we do at school. If you only have 2 players, like we will here, you can just keep track of your score. And the winning player will get to serve the next one. We'll go over that as we're playing. So we're going to get this started, and we'll talk about a few more things as we play and you see the example. All right. Mrs. B's coming out. Here we go. All right, everyone. Mrs. B has joined me, so we're ready to get started. Again, we'll probably touch on a couple other things that will come up during the game. I'm going to let Mrs. B be the server. Now, I'm going to get out of her way. This is something you need to be conscious of on a court that sometimes students forget. After you strike the ball, it's your responsibility to get out of the way of the other player. If it comes right back at you, don't just stand there. So I'm going to give Mrs. B room to serve, but be ready to hit. All right, here we go. Okay, so that's the one strike. Yeah, be ready to hit. All right, so there we go. And you'll notice already what came up. Baby, that was a baby. And neither one of us complained about it because those were legal hits. As long as the ball, you strike it, it hits the wall and lands on the court, it's a legal hit. And those, how quickly we had to move around just in a few points there. All right, so I got that point, which means I would get the next serve. So I would announce the score. If you're playing against one person, it's important in any sport like tennis or handball to always say the score. Because otherwise you're going to get to the 5th or 6th point and you're going to say 4-1. And Mrs. B will say, oh, I have 2 points. And I'll say, oh, no, you don't. I only have 1. And then you go back and forth. If you just announce the score every single point, you'll know what the score is. So 1-0. All right, so that time Mrs. B struck it, but it landed or bounced twice before it hits the wall. So not a legal hit. So that's my point. So next point, 2-0. Now handball. Oops. So I hit that one. The first bounce was out of bounds. That means Mrs. B gets that point, or that point. So now it's her serve. Score, Mrs. B. She almost forgot to tell us the score.
2-1.
Actually, Mrs. B, who's winning?
You are.
So your score should always go first because if Mrs. B says 2-1, that means 2-1. So the score, Mrs. B, is
1-2.
1-2. So there, we almost got in each other's way, but Mrs. B did a great job of allowing me to get to it. Oh, I hit another one out of bounds. So Mrs. B's point on that one.
2-2.
2-2. So she's going to let it bounce before she serves it. Here we go. Much better game on this one. We're both having to move around a lot. Notice a mix of hard shots and softer shots. Shots towards the line. Oh! Tried to use my non-dominant hand there, but hit my foot. So Mrs. B got that one again. We also moved our cones. So we'll fix this one a little bit. Now, real quick, I'm going to take a quick break. Not just because Mrs. B is beating me, which she is right now, to explain how we're going to use this wall here. This has not happened so far. So we're going to go ahead and use the bouncier ball. We talked about the different types of balls last week. So here's how we're going to modify our game. At school, if it hits inbounds and then goes past where our back wall would be here, it would be in. But since we have a back wall here today, we're going to try and incorporate this wall into the game to make it a little more challenging. So if it bounces, hits the wall, I could then return the ball and we would keep the game going. But if it hits the wall, the front wall, and goes directly to the back wall, we're going to consider that out because it landed past the boundary. So Mrs. B wanted to use this ball anyway. So here we go with the bouncier ball and see how the game changes a little bit.
3-2.
She's very proud of that. Uh-oh. Now 3-3, as Mrs. B broke one of our rules, she forgot that you must let the ball bounce. 3-3. She was so excited about winning.
That was out.
Actually, so here we go with our elementary school rules. The ball landed here on the line. The line in handball is in. So we hadn't covered that one. Mrs. B missed my explanation of rules. So the line in handball or foursquare, or actually, sorry, not a foursquare. The line in handball is in. So in some games the line is in, in some games the line is out. Handball is a game where the line is in. So Mrs. B caught the ball, not allowed, 4-3. Ah, it was a baby! 4-4 for Mrs. B. Good job. Remember to let it bounce that time. Those balls again, much bounce here. So the balls are going a little further down. That was in. Good job, Mrs. B. Was able to keep it in bounds. All right. So that was my point. All right, boys and girls. So we're going to turn you loose now to hopefully play on your own and have some fun. I think we're going to play a few more rounds here because our game's pretty close right now. So we hope you have fun. Again, make sure you're following all the rules. You hit it, you strike it, hits the ground, hits the wall, and then it lands in bounds. That is the only basic rule you need to keep in mind, and make sure you let it bounce before you serve it. All right, everybody, have fun playing handball. We're going to have some more fun out here before it gets too hot. We'll see you in the next section. Great job, everyone.